What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Body Lock. It's your man Ant Walker here, joined by my good friend Matthew Wells. Matt, we've got some interesting news that broke this morning. I woke up to a PR release emailed to me from the UFC about a new some sort of technology to help fighters manage their health and fitness leading up to fights. Some sort of ring, I believe it's pronounced Aurora Ring. Close enough, whatever. But anyway, I didn't really go through this press release too much. I skimmed through it, went about my day, and then I see reports that Daniel Cormier tested positive for COVID-19 in the weeks leading up to the trilogy fight with Stipe Miocic, which just took place at UFC 252. There are so many different angles to discuss about this, but I'm gonna just go ahead and hand the baton off to you. What was your first reaction when you got that news?
My first initial reaction was, of course he tested positive, and we didn't hear about it till now, right? That was the first thing that came across my mind, and it's one of those things where, of course, considering the climate, you kind of expect someone to pop up with a test. Like we would always have, like, all right, like every week before coronavirus, it's like, all right, who's gonna miss weight or something like that. Now it's who's gonna test positive for COVID. But luckily, we still got the fight that everybody wanted. So that's a good thing. But the way this rolled out was kind of weird, right? Like you said, you got the PR press release. I got the same thing too. And it's just one of those things like, well, they blast out these emails from time to time about like new sponsorship things. And it's all like, all right, that's cool. And you just kind of keep going about your day. And then like hours later, you see all these articles pop up. Oh, Daniel Cormier says he tested positive while he was using this thing. I was like, man, this is the weirdest ad rollout I've ever seen in my life, you know? But it's just crazy that we go through this thing where that news doesn't really hit our headlines till after the fact because it's like, oh, I guess we don't want an outrage to kind of come out about like, oh, should Cormier still be fighting, and then like all of the excuses before the fight and all that kind of thing. I don't know. Like you said, there's a lot of different ways to look at it, but my first instinct, my first reaction was, of course. So, what was your initial thoughts when you saw that all this hit today?
My first reaction was I was really all over the place. I first was what? What? Why did this still happen? And
Mhm.
then you realize, when this is tied into a PR release about some new health and fitness partnership, like similar to what you said, this is part of the rollout. Like this is your promo package for the new album that's dropping. I don't.
Yep.
it- this seems really wrong, and then it just opened up all these other doors for me. So I'm gonna get back to something that you said initially. It's like, well, at least this time we got the fight. But is that a good thing? It is a good thing that Daniel Cormier knew he had COVID-19. Not
Mhm.
one of these cases where a fighter gets to the hotel or whatever holding facility there is, or fight island, whatever the case may be. They get there after they've gone through this camp, and then they realize they have COVID-19, and they're pulled from the car, or they're sequestered, or questions are asked, or whatever the case may be. He knew about this full on well without a shadow of a doubt and proceeded anyway. Proceeded with everything anyway. I say that is not a good thing. I say that is a terrible thing. And not because Stipe Miocic or Marlon Vera or I don't know Vince Pichel or anyone else that fought on that card at UFC 252 wouldn't be necessarily healthy enough to get through it. I mean, yeah, that most likely they would survive it, and it wouldn't be that big of a deal for them. But what about their family members?
Mhm.
Stipe Miocic is a first responder in Cleveland. He's a firefighter and a paramedic. He comes in contact with all sorts of people on any random day that he's assigned to duty. Is it a good thing that this man, who part of his duties as a firefighter slash paramedic will be performing CPR, would be reviving sick and injured people and tending to all sorts of vulnerable populations. Is it a good thing that a man stood in front of him knowingly with COVID-19 before a fight? You know,
Yeah, it can't be the greatest thing, especially when you hear about it after the fact, right? It's like why did we not hear about it after the fact? Because obviously I think they still wanted to get that fight off and still save some pay-per-view buys, which is hey, money over everything, right?
right.
At the end of the day, like, in a different angle, completely different angle, but I mean, money over everything when it comes to Dustin Poirier, Tony Ferguson, right? Like we're not paying you as much as you're worth here. But with this fight in particular, like you were saying, like you got to think about his opponent, his training partners. For me, is the biggest thing. Like you continue to train after you found out this. What did your training partners say? Were they more apprehensive? Like what? How does that look in the gym?
Right. Well, it's apparently he got it from a training partner. Someone
Right.
at AKA came down with it. The entire camp, coaches included, were tested. They came up negative, and then he started feeling under the weather. And this magic ring that the UFC is now giving out to fighters let him know something was wrong. And there it is. Now he finds out he has COVID-19, but the show must go on. Apparently, you definitely bring up a good point as far as saving the pay-per-view buys. So when we look at that card, the co-main event of that was Marlon Vera versus Sean O'Malley. Excellent fight on paper. That is a fine matchup that everyone was rightfully excited for. However, that's not a pay-per-view headliner. You look down from that Jairzinho Rosenstruck JDS, fantastic matchup on paper. That's probably not a pay-per-view headliner. Um,
Not anymore.
yeah, not yeah, exactly. So back in the day, that would have been. Although
Yeah,
we
yeah.
didn't know who Rosenstruck was, but that's another story. Well, we knew
Mhm.
about him if you watch kickboxing. But anyway, I digress. Um, so clearly, there was an effort to save the card. And this the way this is intertwined with the UFC's latest sponsorship deal or partnership or whatever you want to call this. I find it highly, highly unlikely that the top level of the UFC, the powers that be there, had no idea. I find that very difficult to believe that Dana White did not have the slightest clue that Daniel Cormier had COVID-19 going into this, given that this magic ring unlocked the secrets to his health. Um,
Yeah, especially like I would hope that in the next coming days we hear how many times he actually was tested in the lead up to the fight and cleared and all that good stuff. I doubt we will, with any sort of terms of clarity, but I would expect the usual. Oh, well, he was tested during fight week and he was fine. But we've seen the UFC pull fighters off a couple of weeks out when they've tested positive. So why didn't that happen here? They've had fights rescheduled. Why did that not happen here? And I think it's because of money. At the end of the day, we're keeping this card together, no matter what. Unless if Daniel Cormier comes in and tests positive on Monday or on Tuesday, we're going to keep this fight together and pray everything is on the up and up. And even then, when you do that for the main event of a pay-per-view heavyweight championship fight, Daniel Cormier's retirement fight, that sells everybody that that fight is big enough to kind of skirt around some of the protocols that you have been doing beforehand. Like I just mentioned, when you pull fighters off 2 weeks out in advance from a fight when they test positive, you know, still in camp.
Yeah, I mean, I'm reminded of another situation, ironically, on a card that Daniel Cormier was fighting on, albeit not in its original iteration for his participation on that card, but UFC 200 infamously um, showed Brock Lesnar, showcased Brock Lesnar without the USADA protocols in place for him. He was given an exception, and we saw how that turned out. Um, so seems to be another case of the UFC saying, okay, the regulation that we run toward, um, not so much, not so much for the money, not so
I'm
much.
glad. Sorry to cut you off.
Sure.
I'm glad you brought up UFC 200 there because Daniel Cormier himself was also trying to skirt around some rules when he said, "Let me sign a waiver to fight John Jones," even though he just tested positive for a drug test. So
Yeah,
That's all it's.
exactly. And you know what? And that brings me back to something else. As another point that one of the first things that popped up in my head once this news broke was like wow, the honor system just really ain't the thing for the UFC nor for fighters in general. I think this showcases exactly why so much of the media was apprehensive about plans to move ahead when this pandemic first started. The way the UFC they've done a masterful job of keeping so many things in house. The problem with keeping things in house is that there is no transparency. So even if we were to get some sort of information about tests after the fact, and he tested negative for COVID a week before the fight or during fight week or something like that, would you trust it? Would you trust that you're hearing accurate information and it was passed down with good faith? I have a hard time, siding with that at this point because this was a clear violation of everything that the company was insisting was the protocol when all of this first started. There was a reason why um, Governor Newsom and forget whatever senator it was called Disney to stop the ghost card at Tachi Palace because this sort of thing could happen. The reason why so many people in media were apprehensive about this going on because this sort of thing can happen, and why we were scratching our heads wondering why Fight Island is taking place. Well, because these sort of things can happen without any sort of oversight. Um, so I'm just, as much as I'm surprised, I shouldn't be. Is probably the point I'm getting at. I should not be surprised because we've seen this precedent for similar things. Vitor Belfort also allowed to fight when he tested for elevated testosterone in his system ahead of his challenge against John Jones some years back. So I guess if the money's right, the show goes on, but at what cost?
Yeah, and it's also like you were talking about keeping things in house right there. A good friend of mine said a while back, when the coronavirus thing, hit initially, like way back in March when it started flaring up quite a lot, and our president was downplaying everything as he famously did. Um, he said at that time, Donald Trump could test positive and we would never know. He could have tested positive a couple of times and we will never know. And I think that's the same thing here with Dana White in particular, because we see Dana White shaking hands with fighters who have tested positive for COVID. So I think this goes along the lines of that. You keep everything in house. Hey, Dana White could have tested once or twice positive. We will never know. I think that that's one of those things that they're going to keep hush hush. Um, Not saying that he has tested positive. I'm just saying I think it's one of those things you have to question at this point, right? Like, does he test positive, and would we ever know? I don't know. I think they would just keep that on the hush, make sure he's actually good before he's around other people. But will we ever know that in media? I don't know. It's just one of those things, man. You have to kind of keep. I don't want to start a conspiracy theory thing here, but it's just one of those things, man. Like you really kind of gotta question it a little bit. I don't want to get too conspiratorial, but you gotta question it. And it's when you, like you were saying, man, you're showing that you're going to skirt around certain things when the fight is big enough, when the money is that necessary, when you are the first out of the gate to bring sports back, never really even stop. You're the first ones that's going in there and trying to do it, which, hey, I commend you. I appreciate having fights to watch to keep us entertained and be able to pay these fighters who have no other, means of real income during these times, especially during these times. But even in normal times, they fight to make money. But in doing that, like you said, the reason why everyone was so skeptical and so hardcore on making sure everything is on the up and up is because we don't want to see anybody get sick. And if you skirt around your own protocols and government regulations, like you said, to go throw a fight card on Itachi Palace when everybody says no, what are we really doing here, man? Like, are we trying to keep everybody healthy, or are we trying to make sure that the UFC keeps the cash flow coming at all costs, no matter what? Fighter health be damned, trainers health be damned, UFC staff be damned. And I will get again, I'll give the UFC credit. They've done a lot of good things when it comes to their protocols and everything, but are they sticking to it 100% of the time? I think this is one of those stories that proves that that's not the case.
Right. And you know what? I'm glad you brought that up too, because initially when the UFC was pressing forward, I mean, we saw how um, the card that was UFC 249 went through 30 different iterations, venue changes and all sorts of possibilities of where it could end up, and could be stranded in Dubai. It turned into quite a fiasco until we finally got some product in Jacksonville. Now, from the talks that we've heard from people that we know that were covering those fights in Jacksonville when they initially took some events during the pandemic, ha- describing what some of those protocols were like. And then as they moved to the Apex Center and they moved to Fight Island and seeing certain things evolve and seeing certain things improve, I think some of the people, I say most of the people in media, myself included, were a lot less skeptical at that point, were complimentary even of the steps being taken. And yeah, we had that just absolute ludicrous debacle when it came to Jacare, at one of those cards. That was nuts. But we didn't see we don't know for sure, but we don't think we saw anything like that again, right? And it was like, okay, well, they're improving upon the system, even if that mistake was so glaringly obvious and amateurish even. They did improve upon the system, and we're hearing less about potential disasters. We're hearing more about fighters getting their, pulled from the card before they are in a room full of everyone cutting weight, before they're shaking hands and staring down for the most part. But now, looking back at this, like, wow, how many other things might have just skirted by? How many other things have just you know, been swept under the rug? Or conversely, how many things in the future will be swept under the rug? Because now a clear precedent has been set in regards to COVID-19.
Facts, man. And I think this is one of those things. It reminds me of the USADA thing. When USADA would initially announce, back when the deal first started, they initially would announce when a fighter tested or when a fighter popped, they immediately let everybody know, regardless of if it was a false positive or whatever have you, or if it was a tainted supplement. They wouldn't say it. Hey, so and so popped for for an illegal substance. They're going to be pulled from this fight. And the reason they stopped doing that is because they didn't want to have fighters be labeled as a steroid cheat, quote unquote cheater, whatever have you. This is different. So I think we should be looking for that same USADA protocol that they had when a fighter tests positive. Bam, that should hit everywhere. That should hit everywhere. There shouldn't be any, we have to wait a few weeks to find out. This is completely different than a tainted supplement or a blatant steroid use. This is, you caught the global pandemic that is going on right now. That is, as much as some people in this country would like you to believe is a hoax or is not a real thing, 200,000 people have died from this in America alone. It's very much real. It's very much not over. So this is one of those things that we should know about from the jump when somebody tests positive. And the only reason I say that is just to keep everything honest, keep everything on the up and up. And then from that point on, if Daniel Cormier, for example, got tested every single day after that and was clear, then we should know about that as well. Shouldn't be
Right.
questions.
It sounds like a fair and very simple solution to this problem. But man, I'll take it in a different direction. So aside from the obvious issues as far as regulation is concerned, just from a pure fight perspective, I mean, this fight, this trilogy matchup between Daniel Cormier and Stipe Miocic was billed as the the deciding factor in the greatest mixed martial arts heavyweight of all time, or at the very least, the greatest heavyweight in UFC history. They even had the marketing team at Modelo even thought of the genius idea of having the dark beard next to Daniel Cormier and the lighter beard next to Stipe on the poster. Like this, they pulled out all the stops for this. All right. So, but now with this in mind, do you feel like, I mean, we had eye pokes, we had all sorts of just weird things going on as far as the gap between some of these fights. Do Does this trilogy feel tainted to you now that We know that a potentially diminished version of Cormier was in there.
Ah, man, as much as I wanna I mean, you can't ignore it, like, that has to be a part of it. It has to be part of the story of this fight now. I will say that Cormier was looking good, not good, but he looked like a fighter who could have competed to the best of his abilities until he got poked in the eye. I will say that, which is also a major storyline in the outcome of that fight. So, yeah, it's part of the story at this point. Does that mean Cormier would have won? I don't know. Stipe beat him the first time or the second time around. So it's hard to say whether or not that would have changed the outcome of the fight, but it's definitely part of the story. It can't be left out now. So you have to consider that as a possibility of, the weeks leading up when it comes to his cardio, his weight cut, how much he was able to train, how much he couldn't be around his training partners, how much he, played into all of those things. Would it have changed the outcome of the fight? Yes, no, we don't know. We will never know. There's no way of knowing that, but it's something you have to add into the story of that third fight. Like you said, the biggest fight in heavyweight history in the UFC.
Yeah. Right. I mean, it's unfortunate. I mean, the what decided the greatest heavyweight in UFC history has several asterisks next to it. So there's that. But man, I'll leave it with this. Just a quick question. When you get one of these magic Aurora rings, what debilitating disease will you be hiding from the general public?
Oh my gosh. If it says anything, I'm going to return it and say it's defective. I know that much. Give me my $300 back.
Yeah, $300. I don't know if that's worth it, fam. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, apparently the new Apple Watch can detect COVID, so I'll be cool with just give me that. Just give me the new Apple Watch.
I'm not an Apple guy, so give me the magic ring. Yeah, give me a magic ring. I might give y'all a good review. We'll see what happens.